Hi, everybody. We're going to get started in just a minute as we let everybody in. Appreciate everyone's patience. Awesome. Well, my name is Kumar Garg. I'm the managing director of Schmidt Futures. And I wanted to welcome everybody to our conversation today. This is the Futures Forum on Learning series. It's part of a process that we actually started last year during the pandemic, which is to create a series of conversations, events, and competitions all built around how do we help students, educators, and others start to build back from the immense hole that the pandemic is causing around the globe. This is actually a series that we are running all throughout September. But before I sort of say a little bit more, let me just give a quick few notes just for people to know. So one is that this conversation is being recorded. So hopefully folks are good with that. Not everyone can make this exact time zone. And so we like to make sure that we keep these so that other people can benefit from it. These conversations are meant to draw towards a tools competition that will be happening on October 1 as a deadline. And so we hope to have lots of folks who are listening here apply for that. The second is, we're running this as an open conversation. And so obviously we're going to have a keynote and a panelist, but we really encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat function. And as you're listening, to pose questions there that our moderator and panelists will hope to catch at the end of the conversation. The third thing I'll just say is that this conversation will run an hour, but we're going to have a networking session and a Q&A session that will run for 30 minutes following this conversation for anybody who's interested in follow-up conversation specifically on the tools competition. We found that we ran that for the first session that we did of the Futures Forum series last week. It was incredibly productive. People have lots of big and small questions, and we really encourage you to stick around and get those answered. So, as I was saying, part of the logic model for why we're doing this Futures Forum series is, there's an endless series of op-eds on what's going on with education, but I think there's a number of underlying trends as to how education is really shifting as we live through the pandemic. And one of the topics we covered last week was just our expectation of the changing skills economy. What is the economy that kids and adults are actually going into? And what is our notion for lifelong learning as we go into it? So we had Andrea Schleicher from the OECD, we had Maria Flynn from JFF, we had a number of sort of great speakers sort of engage it. And this is the second of our series, and this is really focused on looking at the world of assessments. And I think this story has been largely not told because I think most people don't realize how much the assessment industry or assessments as an enterprise took a hit during COVID. Partly this is that most assessments happen in person, and so a large number of annual assessments actually got put on hold. If folks could be on mute, that would be great. Appreciate. So I think one is that. The second is, I think people's expectation, given that we had a huge loss in overall learning time, if we're going to take that less learning time and now spend it even more on assessment, I think that also sort of raised questions. And then the third one is, in some ways, every child as they re-enter schools around the world needs to get some sense of where are they struggling, where do they need to go. So the need for actually getting better sense of where students are has only gone up. So I think this is a huge moment to sort of start to unpack a number of these themes. And part of the way we're doing that is we're partnered with our friends at the Walton Family Foundation, which is helping sponsor a track specifically focused on assessments as part of the tools competition. And we're lucky to have a number of their folks from their leadership here today. And a number of other leaders will help us spell out. But I'm really hoping that folks come with lots of questions around this moment, really push our speakers and panelists, and then ideally come up with amazing ideas that they apply into the tools competition for. Last year the tools competition gave approximately $1.5 million worth of prizes. This year we are on track to do more than double of that. And we're excited to see what amazing ideas come out of it. One just last thing I'll just sort of say before I sort of pass it to our keynote is, one thing that we've really focused in on is not just treating this competition in our overall body of work as just ed tech, but really focusing on something that we sort of call learning engineering. And the focus on learning engineering has been the idea that we can be, using the best of learning science and the best of computer science and the best of sort of instrumenting data to build, systems that actually are designed for continuous improvement. And by that, what I mean is just that so much of what we do in education is just received wisdom. We teach this bit of math after this bit of math because I don't know, that's why the way we teach math. And if you actually instrument learning environments and say, well, if we change the order of these things, do students learn faster? Do some sets of students learn faster? What you find is that actually our intuitions about what works are not always true. And we have a huge range of additional experimentation that we can do if we build it into our system. So that's one of our philosophies, which is how can we use the computer science revolution to actually have more humility about what students need, not less. It's not going to be one size fits all, but if we're really going to deliver differentiated education to everybody, we have to build data intensive systems that actually can support that. So I'm really excited about this conversation and where assessment as an industry can go and ways we can respond to this challenge. And with that, let me introduce our keynote speaker, David Coleman, who's the CEO of College Board. David has had an immense impact in his tenure at College Board, whether it's something that he doesn't even get that much credit for, which is embedding data science as a core component across a number of the SATs. But then the work that they've done in creating the AP around computer science and a number of other reforms. But David, you've sort of been seeing this work up close. Would love to get your thoughts on where we've come and where we're going, and also, ideally, how you would challenge the many innovators and other folks listening on what kind of innovations you really hope to see coming out of this. But welcome.
Thank you, Kumar, and thanks for your long devotion to innovation. And it's a supremely exciting group of people assembled to ask questions. So I'm going to be brief, but also because I'm very impressed with Alina. I followed her career for a long time. She'll join me on the panel. And Claire Mchule looks like an utterly fascinating platform in the African environment. So I'm dying to get to the panel and the bright people here. When I was thinking about how to talk to you about innovation assessment, I thought a simple framework might help us almost from childhood, which is to think of who, what, where, when, why, and how we assess students. And I want to share with you briefly a couple of innovations in those categories that we're pursuing or have pursued, and what I think is at stake at them. So let's begin with who, when, and where students take assessment. Interestingly, perhaps the most consequential innovation around the SAT is a rather humble one, which is where and when it's given, which is during the school day. And I think the architect of this humane innovation is Cindy Smizer, while she was at ACT actually, where Aline also spent some time, where Cindy and her colleagues discovered that if you gave an exam like the ACT or SAT during the school day, a whole range of students who would not think to take it, who would not go on a Saturday, wind up taking the exam. And then Sue Dynarski and others have reviewed research that you find a body of students who did not think they were going to college, or rather, to be precise about the result, that are more likely to apply and enroll because they took an exam during the school day. I think we so often obsess about a set of students who are trying to figure out which college to go to. We forget for so many in this country that even the choice to go to college is uncertain. And the idea of this universal access during the school day was a major advance in access. It's radically diversified who are taking these exams. So I think a profundity for us all to think about is who, when, and where do students take an exam? Because when it's a choice, when it's an election or a choice on something like a Saturday, it changes profoundly who succeeds at that. The second question, of course, is why students take an assessment. In other words, what do they get out of it? And it's long been our belief that assessment without opportunity is dead, that we need to press ourselves to go further than that they're going to learn something about their growth. Is it going to give them a credential that's meaningful and powerful? And I think the College Board must be constantly self-critical of whether or not we're really advancing students. And I think an area where we could grow and develop so much. So I've just said that isn't it great that all students in high school, so we give we give the SAT now during the school day in public schools throughout the country. But what about those group of students for whom a four-year college is not a first step? They get back a score report and it says something on the order of, you are not yet showing readiness for a four-year degree. But in my view, and that's approximately 40 to 50% of students, depending on the situation, and in my view, we have not served them well. They probably knew that already from past assessments they've told, and we are not giving them a path forward. So in a set of innovations we're developing, some of with partners here, our aim is to provide a new path forward for those students for whom a four-year college is not a first step. Can we work together with partners like Jobs for the Future and other providers of local high-quality jobs information to give a student who might not be short of four-year college readiness, but is ready for a great deal, and give them certification and other urges to explore their interests through multiple measures and through a conversation or interest inventory with them, and then give them a local insight as to a productive first step they can take, whether that's at a community college for a productive credential or whether another kind of credential that they can pursue. Because frankly, in the absence of good advice, in the absence of a good step, those high school students are so, when they graduate from high school, not going on to a four-year college, are so vulnerable to predatory players who put them in debt without degree situations. So can we do more as a community to create a more productive link to employers and certifications for those students for whom four-year colleges may not be a first step, but there are many productive steps they could take. So that's beginning to think about why. And you know, we've long tried to expand the scholarship and recognitions associated with the exams so that the power of these exams to raise your hand and announce yourself is strengthened. I think an alumni of the College Board, Graham Molesky, is here, which I was delighted to see because he helped architect the broadening of the scholarship portfolio of the College Board, which began with a partner, National Merit, which is a crucial partner of the College Board. You're familiar with the National Merit Scholarship, but at the same time, we've widened it to a wider range of scholarships and other opportunities and a broader set of recognitions because remarkably, students respond when colleges and scholarship providers reach out to them when a conversation begins. There's striking data that when a student is reached out to by a college, they're overwhelmingly more likely, upwards of 30%, to actually go on and enroll and respond. So we have to do everything we can to create those conversations. There, of course, is the question of what is assessed. And Kumar mentioned our utter commitment to weaving the discipline of data analysis and data science throughout what students are assessed in, because it's utterly essential for their success. So think about how often, or for so long, that biology was the strange science where increasingly in modern biology, data is absolutely essential, but that hasn't changed often how it's taught in school. So in the brilliant revision of AP biology that Kristen Huff and others led, they integrated mathematics, they integrated data analysis much more fully. And we look at every course we have to think of the productive uses of data, not just as a separate matter, but within those courses, within the work. And as Kumar mentioned, even within the SAT itself, students do not only, as you might remember from your childhood, edit passages as to where they correct, they also read tables and graphs and discern whether the data is analyzed correctly in the comments that follow. That is, even to read accurately demands command of data. And I think Steve Levitt and the Schmidt Foundation have just been so great about promoting data science. I'm so pleased that Ulrich has helped take the lead in cultivating demand for data science, and we're super excited about that at the College Board. Of course, a key question in assessment is how. How do we assess what students know? And over the time that I've led the College Board, I've been haunted by how profound those choices can be in affecting what invitation, what steps students can take, how includes the security of the assessment. I believe my colleague Peter and Camille from the College Board are here, and I'm frankly kind of in awe of how my colleagues at the College Board developed the at-home AP exam in such a short time. And as you can imagine, they lead the security area of the College Board, to suddenly secure an exam that is open book with an open internet at homes throughout America without a security crisis is an astonishing achievement. I'm so impressed with the variety of assessments that were developed, with all the techniques that were out there. There need to be advances in time. How can we at once give students more time per question, a sense of a less speeded experience? Because we must never confuse quick and smart. So give students a sense of leisure or a sense of broader time on the exam to breathe, maybe recover from mistakes, but at the same time, shorten assessment. It's a very interesting dual design principle. How can we go digital in assessment, but yet improve the digital divide? These are the kinds of questions the College Board is thinking about, of how we can really advance opportunity by innovating in a variety of ways at once. And you'll hear a lot more about our plans regarding that for the digital SAT come January. I'd like to end, though, with one story of kind of what's at stake in how we design courses and assess students. We, for 20 years, gave a course called Advanced Computer Science, and that is an advanced Java course. For a 20-year period, we gave it for longer than 20 years, but during the period from 1994 to 2014, the composition of the students who take that course roughly remained unchanged. It was 80% young men, 20% young women. And the dearth of minority students, of underrepresented students, was so extreme that in 2010, in 10 to 14 states, not a single Latino or African American took the exam. That is a wall of inequality from which none of us can recover. And frankly, at the College Board, you could say, it's not our fault, we make the course, we don't determine who takes it. But quite frankly, while it may not be our fault, it certainly is our problem. And so Trevor Packer and others rethought computer science, and they developed with the National Science Foundation a new course called Computer Science Principles. This course did not ask students, would they like to learn the advanced grammar of a language they were not interested in, call that computer science for them, but instead said, would you like to use computer science and data to solve a problem? Are you interested in building an app, whether it's in the arts or in a nonprofit environment or in science or whatever you're interested in? And the way it was assessed was through a combination of an exam, but also a required project where they could express what they're most interested in. And what's striking is in a few short years, it is now 65%, 35% young men to young women, a transformation in women's participation, and tens upon thousands of African-American and Latino students taking the exam. And maybe like my favorite day at the job over the last 8 years was when I got an email from one of the admissions officers saying he was a skeptic, but he now is seeing so many women of color that are aspiring computer scientists in his admissions pool. And it's such a change. And our chance to change that pipeline is perhaps our most sacred task by changing the invitation. We all have to reflect on what we ask students to do and how that might change them. And I think the biggest work we have going forward is to change the invitation so a broader set of students show their talents, and we continue to see talent previously unseen. And with that, I want to turn it back to Kumar and the panel.
Thank you, David. I think that was incredible. And I also like the structure of breaking down some of the key questions of like, why sort of engage in this work. And so why don't I, I think the goal of this, and I would love as people are hearing both this and the panel conversation to continue to drop your questions into the chat or reflections that they have. But with this, why don't we get into our panel side? It's my absolute pleasure to invite Joanna Cannon, who's the Senior Program Officer for K-12 education at the Walton Family Foundation. Joanna, I feel like it's hard for me to imagine someone who's done more, both you, but then also the Family Foundation, in thinking deeply about assessment as an overall space, mapping it out, thinking hard about what are ways that folks can drive it towards the impact that it seeks. So I would love, as you're sort of weaving in and running this panel, just sharing some of the insights of where you are, and then, what are the biggest gaps you see where you would love to see more innovation. And it's been wonderful to partner with you on the competition itself, and looking forward to doing even more together. So Joanna's going to be moderating and running this panel. So Joanna.
Thank you, Kumar. Really excited to be here today. And in particular, at the Walton Family Foundation, we're very focused at the moment about thinking about these unique opportunities that this moment in time with the pandemic has created to increase the power of assessments and to increase the power of them, in particular, to serve families, students, and educators well. And I would say, David, thank you for that framework you shared too, just reminding us of the elementary who, what, when, where, why, and how. We think every element of that framework is fair game at the moment to reconsider how we may reinvent and innovate how we think about and do assessments. Certainly, we all know when they're done well, we've seen assessments be powerful at every level of the education system, from helping us make informed high stakes decisions to daily classroom choices. And we also know, thanks to folks like David that have been doing this work for a long time, that assessments can do more. In particular, and I think, Kumar, this is a point that we've really been focused on a lot at the foundation over the last few years. In particular, what more can assessments do to help families support students and help educators? But that sort of component of families and what information they need to support students' learning is something that I think sometimes can get lost in the fray in terms of how we think about the design of assessments. And certainly COVID has amplified that question more so than perhaps ever before. So, our field continues to seek ways to improve assessments, their cost, how to make them less costly, addressing issues of time, the sophistication and quality of assessments. And today we're here to talk about why we're so hopeful about the future of assessment, in particular, because some of those old barriers of time and cost and quality, they're beginning to crumble in the face of new AI and emerging technology. And we're also seeing that the field is increasingly filled with imaginative designers, two of which we have the privilege of having on today's panel, who are willing to push the boundaries of what's possible, who are willing to really ask questions about how can we better serve students, families, and educators. So I'm happy to weave in more, as Kumar said, about our orientation as we go, but I don't want to delay talking with our panelists. So to begin, Claire, Alina, can you just please both introduce yourselves and speak a little bit about what your organizations do?
Sure. Should I start, or Claire, do you want to start?
Alina, feel free.
All right. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to thank the Learning Agency for inviting me. This is really an interesting topic and is very close to my heart. So I'm delighted to hear what my colleagues, panelists have to say about assessment. I work for Duolingo, which among other remarkable things has the first digital first assessment. And I will use the Duolingo English test as an example in my presentation today in how assessment could be improved in order to have a maximum social impact. Otherwise about me, before that, I was a chief officer with ACT, where I led ACT Next, an R&D innovation division. And my focus at that time was to bring innovation in assessment. It's just that at that time, I was doing it from the side of traditional psychometrics, traditional assessments, and I've been working on bringing AI, machine learning, and data science into our work. So nowadays with Duolingo, I'm doing exactly the opposite, in the sense that I am with the computer scientists trying to convince them and bring to the table the psychometrics, the validity principles, the fairness perspectives on assessment into our work. And before ACT, I worked for many, many years with ETS. I really grew up there. And at some point, I was the center director, senior center director for the international test, especially language assessment, TOEFL and TOEIC. And then I was the senior center director for the innovative Center on Computational Psychometrics. I introduced the concept of computational psychometrics in 2015 to describe this blend of machine learning and psychometrics. And since then, I've been working more or less within this framework, trying to help shift the paradigm, especially for test development and test design, to consider these new tools and new affordances that would help us do better, reach out to more people, and have a stronger social impact. So I will say more about that later in the panel, but I would like Claire to have a chance to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Alina, and hi everyone. It's so great to again be here, and I will echo that I'm also very excited to be with such esteemed professionals in this space, both on the panel and in the group and in the chats. My name is Claire Manjo. I am the CEO and co-founder of Mshule, which means mobile school in Swahili. We are a personalized learning and evaluation platform based in Nairobi, Kenya, and we combine artificial intelligence with text message and SMS to make it possible for the majority of the offline population to get access to these innovative and impactful digital learning tools, even though they might not have internet or smart devices. So Mshule has been around for about 5 years. Previously, I was working in kind of a more traditional education and business space in emerging markets in India and in Kenya. And then after some time working in Kenya and across sub-Saharan Africa, really saw that very similar to parents around the world, they care so much about their children's education and they want to invest in the most helpful tools that can help them succeed, but they really didn't have a lot of options to invest their money in. The education system, again, is very analog. Classrooms are often overcrowded. Teachers are under-resourced and under-trained. And when 80% of the population is low income, it becomes very challenging for them to be able to invest in their students in the way that they really want. And that has resulted in a very wide learning poverty gap on the continent. I believe it's less than 15% of the population of primary schoolers actually graduate with literacy and numeracy skills that are expected at their level. So it's really ripe for change. And so we created Mshule to allow their income, no matter where they were, no matter what device they have, to even use, I have an example here, even just this very basic old school Nokia phone, to be able to interact and use chat and text message to get tutoring, to get personalized lessons over text that help them develop their key skills, and now also be able to evaluate and assess themselves as well. So that is what we're doing at Mshule. And back to you, Joanna.
Thanks, Claire. So fascinating to hear about your work, and Alina, to hear about your trajectory over the years in and out of different spaces and assessment. I wanted to start by just acknowledging that, as we all know, there has been growing backlash to testing over the past few years. And COVID's put greater focus on some of the challenges of assessment, while at the same time raising the importance of new issues, in particular, obviously, about being able to rapidly identify student learning loss and gaps in their learning. So wanted to sort of also just, highlight the example that we were talking about before too, about families. Assessment systems aren't always well designed to help families help their kids. And we know with COVID, certainly many families are currently searching desperately for ways to help their children bounce back from learning loss related to COVID. So my first question is, even before COVID, both Duolingo and Mshule were at the cutting edge of rethinking assessment. Could you help our attendees, learn a little bit more about what are some of the key developments that you have rolled out over the past year and a half to improve your platforms? I'll start with you, Claire.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a really exciting time, especially since I think we've all seen that the role of the parent and the role of the family has become so much more important in students' lives. And those families and parents need to be empowered with information to help their child and help their student progress just as much as schools and the national curriculum bodies. So there's been a lot of exciting things that we have been working on to try to give the power of data back to the hands of the parents, and also increase the quality and the understanding of that data to help them understand, again, how can I support my student the best? So very briefly, for those of you who haven't worked in sub-Saharan Africa, in general, many of the national curricula around the continent are changing from a very exam and teacher-based approach that was all about rote memorization and having one test determine, a student's entire life, to more 21st century skills and competency-based curricula, which is amazing. However, when you're working in an environment in which not only have parents not really been empowered to understand their role in this change, but also many of them may not even be literate themselves, may not have even gone to secondary school, there's a lot of assessment education and evaluation education that needs to be done in order to help parents understand it's not about my child achieving this one number, the top marks so they can go to the best secondary school or college. It's about what information do I need to be able to make the right decisions for my child? So that's what we've been thinking a lot about in the last year, especially in the last year and a half. How can we reduce the cost of assessments from about the national exams are about $25 per child? How can we make that affordable for everyone? So the first thing that we did this last year, as I mentioned, is we actually created an evaluation toolkit that can be deployed over SMS and chat and messaging apps to allow people to test themselves, to allow people to run faster, more formative evaluations, and to get reports that are tailored for their context with recommendations about what they can do next. So that's been really exciting. Instead of parents having to go purchase test papers or practice exams, now they can actually use our platform and do a test for less than $1, which is great, meeting the need of appropriate and accessible technology. We're also deploying these assessments or using these assessment product in collaboration with large-scale organizations, can also work with school chains, so they can also have really fast and quick and easy ways to understand where are our students, even at a distance, even if they're in rural Kenya, even if they're in peri-urban or lower income areas, they still can get at least some information through an SMS tool that lets them know here's where our students are, and here's what we can do about it. So what we're really actually trying to do, and which is why it's so exciting to hear about the progress other organizations have made, especially in the US, is seeing how can we make this little phone be similarly powerful in at-home assessments, even though it's super, super basic. There's so much you can do. So that's some of the stuff that we've been working on in the last year.
Thank you, Claire.
Fascinating, really, Claire. Congratulations. This sounds amazing. I would say the principles for Duolingo have been very similar, and fortunately, Duolingo was ready with respect to the assessment for sure, but everything else, the learning systems that we have in place. So when the pandemic came along, actually, the only thing for the Duolingo English test was to scale up. And why I'm saying that, as you probably heard our CEO, Luis Fonan, talking about our mission, is Duolingo, both as a learning app and the test, wants to provide access to education to people from all over the world, and want to offer opportunities to test takers, to learners all over the world. So in order to do that, we as a company really took advantage of the artificial intelligence capability to scale up. And this is what allowed us to be able to use both the phone for learning and multiple types of phones, but also different types of computer for assessment, different devices for assessment all over the world, 24 hours every day of the year. So in order to scale up from under 40,000 test takers a year to 350 test takers a year, it required a lot of the ability to scale up, but we didn't have to change any of our models. We didn't have to change the way we deliver the test, with the way we generate items, the way we keep the test secure. So everything else was already in place, a really stable model for developing, administering, and monitoring the quality of the test. So what happened in the past year was, well, so now that we are a big test and we do have test takers everywhere and our test is accepted by so many institutions, what we are doing right now is truly to make it as stable as possible from a psychometric perspective, write those papers about the validity and do the right research to show that our test is compliant, it meets all the standards, and it has the right psychometric properties, which I know people who are in the assessment industry, they know how important it is to have evidence that the test actually works. So we are working and on all of those aspects and theoretical aspects and underpinnings of the test. But I want to emphasize the fact that the Duolingo English test proposed itself as an innovator in assessment through the test taker experience. So we are not coming out and saying, oh, we can measure your English skills better than anyone else. So it's not claiming an improvement in the measurement. We are coming and saying we can measure it anytime, anywhere. And we, using the psychometrics, we are able to do so in less than an hour. And using the machine learning technology with psychometrics and security, we are able to offer the test anytime, anywhere, to make it comfortable for you to take the test. So it's a very different paradigm and a very different way of talking about assessment. Also, just today, we have a blog coming, just came out, and it's about a delightful testing experience. And actually, in this case, delightful is a technical term. We are trying to improve the experience of all test takers so that they can perform at their best when they are assessed. So through all of these aspects of our work, but primarily for taking advantages of what the technology can offer us, what the platforms can do for us with respect to the delivery on many devices, and what the machine learning can do and artificial intelligence can do through scalability, and then psychometrics to keep us in touch with the principles of assessment of do no harm, be responsible for the quality of the scores. So all of this coming together to create a really beautiful test, I would say, a delightful test, to quote our own blog that just came out. So I think that's a summary of how we are approaching this challenges of the pandemics, but also the challenges around all the changes in the society, the fact that nowadays all the interactions truly are digitally mediated, and therefore, you know, continuing having assessment on paper it's just will lack validity. Actually, it already probably lacks validity, because if all the interactions are online, then it's a bit more challenging to have the test takers, especially students, show their results in a medium in which they do not work, they do not live anymore. So it's a very artificial.
Thank you, Elena, for helping us sort of understand the sort of wide variation in ways that you've sort of been approaching this work over the last year and a half. And thank you for introducing all of us on the call to the delightful test taking experience. I think we'll all remember that and think about that a lot as we go forward in our sort of ideation around what we're trying to achieve from our assessments. David, I wanted to turn it over to you, and in particular, both interested in what College Board has been innovating around, in particular over the last year and a half, but also what you're seeing from your perch in terms of where the field of assessment has made some shifts in this time as well. Oh, David, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, dear. I do that once a day. At the College Board, I think what we're trying to do is to think about making sure that innovation and assessment advances social mobility and opportunity in the country, that we don't, as it were, get caught up in advances that delight perhaps the assessment community or other communities, but do not materially advance students. So I think that, so something seemingly not an assessment innovation, but as I was saying, so it's an advance that students take the SAT during the school day. And I mentioned that Cindy Schmeiser at AC, formerly of AC, brought some of that thinking to our work. And then she also, though, was once all students are taking an exam, it must provide value for all those students. That's material that takes them forward. And that's where the innovation thinking about what are we really offering those students who are short of college readiness, and came the thinking that she helped lead a new path of building a new path for them, of linking them to employers. So I know that doesn't seem like the work of assessment, but the moment of giving an assessment result is pregnant with possibility if it is humane and creates really well-linked information, which I think, Claire, is some of what you're doing. And SMS messaging, by the way, even in this supposedly more advanced country, which is a whole other conversation, is an incredibly powerful conduit for students to prompt them forward. So we're using a combination of assessment and text prompts to try to get students to take the next step, to take, you might call it, Alina, consequential validity of the assessments. Do students actually do what you hope from them? Does it actually advance them? And Joanna, as we think of rethinking the digital divide, in other words, how can you go digital without exaggerating the divide, but actually healing it? There are flexibilities that are required to make school-based assessment so much more flexible, closer to what Alina's talking about, anytime, anywhere, freedoms that make the digital divide less, even as you're understanding digital. Because otherwise, merely making the same exam digital only sharpens the chokehold about who can take it. If you try to shorten assessment without giving more time per question, without giving that kind of leisure, which is, I love because it's close to a notion of delight, a sense of ease, which is not something we associate with assessment, a sense of confidence, perhaps. If you're trying to inspire that, if you shorten assessment, you must be very thoughtful about how you can illuminate the construct more briefly. And so these are the kinds of dilemmas we've been confronting ourselves with. Joan, I hope that's a good enough answer. Press me on anything you're particularly interested, but I think that the most important thing a college work can do now is acknowledge that merely measuring the inequality that haunts us is utterly not enough today. And, so developing an African-American studies course for the first time in our history, which is something we're considering and likely announcing some news on soon, it's a question of what we assess, what do we invite of students, and does that bring them in and include them in a sense of their future? And what do they then do next? And so I think there's a broader ethical dimension to all of this work if seen more broadly.
Thank you, David. I think that's exactly right. And in the interest of time, I'm going to ask one more question of everyone, and ask that folks try to keep their answers to a couple of minutes so we can leave some time for our attendees to do a bit of Q&A as well. So last question is, for imaginative designers who are out there, they may be new to the field or, seasoned in education. What do you hope to see with new technologies or tools for assessment? And also curious to get your thoughts, if you have any advice about how they could build and grow those tools. So question basically is, for designers, what is the what do you hope to see with new tools or technologies in assessment, and what's your advice on how to build and grow those types of tools? And anyone can go first.
I could go. From my perspective, remember I come from psychometrics and computational modeling perspective with my background in mathematics, and I'm still a researcher. So from my perspective, with that hat on, what I would like to see is taking advantage of the integration of different frameworks. It's very hard to innovate and use artificial intelligence unless you have a seamless way of managing the data. the collection of data, the management of the databases, the integration of the databases, the ancillary data in addition to testing, the learning data, all of them need to work seamlessly. And I would say that's probably the first place, and it sounds so boring and unsexy and nobody wants to talk about it. But without that step, it is very hard to do anything at scale. Of course, if you are a small company and you just started, it's a different story. But for a big organization, the first step is to integrate the data and make it available for sophisticated algorithms. The other portion of that is also about integration. Integrate the theory of learning, the learning engineering structure with everything else, with the data, but also with the psychometrics, with the delivery. And as David pointed out, if we want to make the test shorter, what are the approaches that would help us make it shorter but not lose reliability? So, for example, making the test adaptive is a good way for doing so, but that doesn't come cheap either. You need to invest into your item bank. You need to build it carefully. And if you build it in a similar way in which you build your data from test takers, then if you can put those together, then the power would be really limitless there in terms of ability to scale up and ability of delivering quality assessments. So there is a lot of knowledge needed there, but integration of frameworks, I would say.
Thank you. That's great. That's great. David, turning it to you.
To quote Kumar, humility means partnership. The College Board can't create opportunity alone. So as we work on the career work, we're looking for partners like JFF and others to help build real linkages from adolescence to real career opportunities. Steve Levitt and others have built this extraordinary group at the University of Chicago that leverages data science to create insights as to how we can extend our mission impact. So consider the College Board hungry for partners that can extend the range of our impact at this critical time.
Thank you. And Claire?
Yeah, so I really liked what Alina and David were saying about validity and consequential validity. I think when we're thinking about the tools of assessment, it's really about meeting the learners where they are so that you can assess what you actually want to assess. We say that when people move from a basic SMS phone and get a smartphone, what do they use immediately? Text messaging and WhatsApp or Telegram or messaging apps. They're not downloading all these crazy cool apps and going online. So the method of assessment needs to make sure that we're not testing how digitally literate are you. It's the skills, even language. Are you testing how good they are in science or how good they are in science and English if they just know their mother tongue? So I think that creativity around user behavior and understanding their constraints is a really exciting opportunity of assessment moving forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to turn it over to some questions from our various attendees, and I think we may have time for one or two, so I'll start with one and see if we can get to two. The first one that I wanted to tee up was an interesting question in the chat about ESL writing skills. So we'll be interested from our panelists, what are your design approaches in making a test for assessing ESL writing skills?
So I guess that is for us, given that we have a Duolingo English test, though could be for David too on the AP language tests. So the way we do it is we established a framework, a theoretical framework. We call it an ecosystem of frameworks. It's on our website. So there's a white paper there. So what we are trying to do is first to define what we want to measure, what is the construct, and how this construct can be best measured while being digitally mediated. So first we establish that. Then another framework that we use is an extended evidence-centered design framework. In that case, we are looking at how should we design the task for writing, in this case, in such a way that the evidence that we will collect from that design task will be strong enough to support the claims we want to make about the ability of the person to write. Then the third part, the third component is in a digital environment, we also collect the process data from the writing exercise. In other words, we are looking at timing information, we are looking at sequence, the behavior of the student while writing, for example, deleting, moving paragraphs, and so on. So those are all components that contribute to the writing evaluation. And then the last step, so not all of these are right now implemented. I want to clarify, we are also working on building feedback based on writing. So we are looking to see what type of patterns do we see across all the test takers in how, especially the successful ones, what is their behavior in writing successful essays or writing prompts. So we are looking across patterns for those, and then we'll try to take that information and provide feedback for everyone else.
That's really cool. And just to add a word on that, Claire, picking up on your idea of kind of cognitive labs, I'm thrilled, like I'm most excited about this emergent data. We're doing cog labs on the new digital design for the SAT. And the group that we're seeing the biggest improvements with are ELL students, English language learners, which and in the exam design, which we'll say more about later, they're finding it far more comfortable to encounter the construct of reading and to assert their skills. And that's so important, as you know, because students must feel a wide range of students, an exam is built to some degree for them, and is made not to intimidate or isolate them, but actually to bring out their best work. And that's where our biggest improvements are being seen in this remodeled digital exam. So I'm super interested in this kind of cognitive lab style refinement of the experience that invites a broader set of students to do their best work.
Thank you, David. Claire, one question I had for you sort of on some of this theme is, could you just share a bit about Amshale and how you think about sort of adjusting your assessments and tools to support diverse learners?
Yeah, great question. So we have kind of built for diverse learners, I guess, from the beginning, because working in East African contexts, you're dealing with learners who come from all sorts of backgrounds, different languages or different mother tongues that they've spoken growing up. Maybe when they come to school, they don't even speak the national language in Kenya, that's Swahili, very well, and then immediately they start school in English. So they're already trying to learn in two languages that they're not familiar with. People have a lot of different backgrounds in terms of their income levels. And that permeates, throughout rural versus urban versus peri-urban versus low income versus high income. So we're continuously working on this. One thing that we try to do is also related to language. So with different types of instructional or navigation or guidance, can we put that in more of a vernacular, even if that's a mix of Swahili and English and mother tongue, to make sure people don't get confused by just bringing them around to what questions they need to ask. We also are leveraging a lot of community-based assessments. So in as much as we're delivering the tool over SMS, we're also experimenting with using phone-based proctoring and also training of teachers or community centers to be able to administer or support learners in going through the exam and giving them trainings and support to allow them to provide kind of the in-person resources that can also be more community contextualized versus designing one test to fit all needs when there's so many diverse needs, as David was saying. So those are some of the things that we're experimenting with, but definitely could be doing a lot more.
No, thank you, Claire. That was incredibly helpful to hear about. I'm going to turn it over to Kumar to close out, but before I do, I just want to encourage everyone who's attending. We've heard a lot of great ideas and some strong pushes from our panelists. So please, encourage you to compete in the tools competition to address some of these issues and challenges, because that's obviously what we're all interested in seeing, more and more solutions and more folks trying to engage in this problem space. And I will also just put in a plug for those who haven't been following the chat. There's some interesting commentary about summative assessment as well. Peter, I'm sorry I couldn't get to that question, but I think we would probably spend the next 15 minutes debating it if we went there. So again, thanks for those who have contributed via chat on that one. Kumar?
Amazing. You know what? I'm a nerd on assessments, and part of the reason is that there was a time, if you go back into U.S. education politics like a decade ago, everyone sort of was very tuned into the idea that assessments actually have this huge upstream impact on a whole bunch of other questions around how educational systems are designed. How do we teach? How do we sort of measure? And it's going through a period where it's less in the limelight, but I actually think its broader impact is actually just as wide. And so I think focusing on how is this a moment of opportunity and change as COVID is causing a period of reflection. And there's so much, as our panelists sort of identified, there's so much opportunity and active work happening that this is a pretty active industry. Two things that just sort of listening to the conversation, I would just sort of add are, one is, I think Alina is really onto something with this idea of computational psychometrics, as in, there's endless op-eds on, where will machine learning have a breakthrough impact in education. And at least one hypothesis that I give more credence to is that it's more likely to happen in assessment first, which is that ultimately a lot of machine learning is about prediction. And ultimately the core value proposition for an assessment exercise is to use small amounts of information to get some sense of where a learner is so that we can better target what else we're doing. And so those systems will tag up way earlier than these machine learning systems providing direct instruction or coaching or anything else, given that they have not really infected that world. So I do think this will be the first place where we might see this. The second, I will just say, and I wrote this in an op-ed with Mark Schneider, who's the head of IES, which is I do think that one of the real value propositions is I actually think we have like an endless demand for assessment. Like I actually think rather than thinking about a less assessment, we'll constantly need to be sensing where our learners are so we can do more with them. The real problem is assessment is wildly expensive. And if you try to really implement it continuously, it would be very hard to do. And so cost, I think, is an underlying factor. And I think the sets of innovators who sort of really break the cost side of it have an endless, the analogy that we make in the op-ed is that it's like going to space. For 40 years, the cost of getting a pound of material into space was flat. And so everyone sort of thought about going to space to do one thing, which is like refuel the International Space Station. And now that we're having, a 95% reduction in cost and potentially a 1,000-fold reduction in cost over the next 20 years, there's endless other uses for what getting a pound of material into space is going in. And so it could just be that we're currently treating this as like, pick which one thing we get to assess, but that might just be, in the current paradigm. So I'm really excited about where the field can go. So let me just, thank this incredible panel for all their work. I want to also thank the staff at the Learning Agency and the many organizers for this panel. I think this takes a ton of work, so I want to thank them. And I want to just sort of leave you with a couple of notes. One is, as I reminded at the top, we're going to be having a discussion right at the end of this for 30 minutes with the Learning Agency team for any questions folks have about how to apply to the tools competition. As Joanna said, we really encourage you to apply. The first phase of it is actually the simplest because we want to make it easy for you to get feedback. And so you're able to put forward, what is effectively a pretty small application to just sort of raise your hand for the tools competition. So we really encourage you to do that. And, we're going to be doing 2 more of these sessions. The next one is on the 21st. So I encourage you to stay tuned for additional discussions. And with that, let me thank our panelists again for their incredible contributions and encourage you all to stick around. I'm going to pass it to Meg, who will be leading the follow-up conversation, and hope to chat with you soon.
Great. Thank you so much, Kumar, and all of the panelists. That was a fascinating conversation and really gives us a lot to think about in entering the next short program to dive into the tools competition in particular. So For those of you who are interested in sticking on, please stay on, and we will start off the session with a quick overview of the tools competition, moving into a quick Q&A, and then have some time for small networking groups for folks to share their ideas and get feedback. So with that, we'd just love to quickly start off. My name is Meg Benner. I work at the Learning Agency, which has the pleasure of helping to organize the Learning Engineering Tools competition again this year. We were really humbled by the tremendous outpouring of interest we saw last year in the tools competition, and we're really excited to work with all of you again and new competitors to really help you build your proposal over time. So some quick facts about the competition. The competition is designed to be inclusive. I think we think about that in a couple of different ways. So first off, obviously a competition has to name winners, but we are really eager to get in as many people who are interested to help them provide feedback, resources and partnerships in order to help individuals kind of develop their idea, build their team. And because of that, we have designed the competition to be applicable for both new entrants to the field, if you're getting an idea just off the ground, and all the way up to more established platforms that already have a tool that they're looking to tweak or change. And so we have 2 prize bands dependent on kind of which category you fall into. There's an eligibility quiz, which will pop into the chat that you can explore on your own time to get a sense of which you fit into better. And this year we have 4 priority tracks for competition proposals. Today we explored one of them being transforming assessment. We have another one on accelerating learning in literacy and math, another on adult learning, and finally one on improving research tools. We're evaluating proposals across a number of different criteria, which are listed here. And I think besides those, we're really looking specifically at how proposals are really looking to continually improve, not just within your own platform, but how you're contributing to the larger field. So as I mentioned before, and as Kumar noted at the beginning, or right at the beginning of this session, the deadline for the first phase of the competition is just around the corner, October 1st, but it's a very light lift. It's an opportunity to provide a quick overview of the tool that you're thinking of and your team, so that you can kind of just demonstrate your interest. And then before you put a lot of your time into the proposal, get some feedback from us if you're a good fit. And then the larger proposal will be due at the end of December. And then there'll be a 3rd phase of the competition for those who advance to the finalist round to pitch before a panel of judges.